Hyperthreading. This was a buzzword. I'll tell you, back in, say, the early 90s, when a system that had 8 megabytes of RAM was doing really well, there were companies that sold RAM doublers. I had a Mac Performa that had 12 gigs of RAM, and I purchased a piece of software called RAM Doubler that used some trickery. Actually, it borrowed hard drive space to make the system believe that it had double the amount of RAM. Well, hyperthreading's always struck me in somewhat the same way, but believe it or not, it's still around. And it's pretty mature as a technology. It came about in the early 2000s with the Intel Xeon server processors and the Pentium 4 desktop processors. And what hyperthreading does, it mimics a multi-core situation. Remember, in 2002, all processors had just a single core on them. But in hyperthreading, for each physical core, the processor creates 2 logical cores. So what you wind up with is multitasking, where the processor can actually schedule more than one action at a time. Now, of course, it still actually with one core can only do one thing at a time, but it's more efficient scheduling. And like I said, there are still processors now in 2015, 2016 that can do hyperthreading even with 4 and 8 cores, because when it comes to CPUs, there's never enough performance, is there? As a final note, your operating system does need to support hyperthreading. Any current gen operating system, OS 10, Windows, Linux, will do so.